I don't know if you can hear me.
Late joiner.
He's on mute. You want to say?
I have a friend who's on the board, and she invited us. Then I got to today, and it was like,
Where Sarah introduced the show.
Not married. She should be able to do So back to Australia. Would you like taking classes? Sounds like my son. I have someone who's I can tell you all about it. We're unbelievable. Now has started to feel not so great. I think that I was fine, but it's not. I feel finally like I've turned sick and yeah, I have an idea of super. Grab some later. Greg, it's hard to get I know, I didn't really want to finish it.
Yeah.
Let's go over. Okay, well, thank you.
Let me see if I can get a few more of these.
Stuff in my face. A lot of great pictures. There's something. I couldn't be on that long. I have more affairs. I had. I'm gonna hang with people, very interesting, very. That's more easy.
Feel like you're wandering?
My call monitor. Time of year. Shows pictures and you can narrate. Not too many. Not too many.
Jeff, you want to you're bringing back?
On geography. Because if you're a landlocked country, you're not very tragic. So exciting.
My volume is up.
Hey, Bill, we're ready.
We are.
Secretary Cohen, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you fine.
Wonderful.
I was going to say, what an unruly crowd, but they've all quieted down.
That's right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome in particular, Secretary Cohen. Thanks for joining us. It's a real honor. My name is David Plum. They're clapping already. My name is David Plum, and I'm president here at the World Affairs Council of Maine. It's wonderful to see so many people come out for a conversation like this. you might have seen, I sent an email out today to the membership. If you're a member, you may have seen it come across. I really think this is an important moment for us as a council, as a civic organization, to step up and to pay attention, right? And to listen and to learn, and to build community around that. It's really exciting to have Secretary Cohen here to talk with us today. It is momentous what's happening around us. And I think, Secretary Cohen, we look forward to a conversation around the bigger picture of national security, the bigger picture of what's happening. And of course, as we see events unfold day to day about US action on some of these issues, we'd be curious to hear about that too. Sarah Petrin is one of our board members and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, sorry, the Atlantic Council. It's a little late in the day. Is going to be in conversation with Secretary Cohen. We look forward to that, but mostly it's a big thank you for everyone coming out tonight. Am I in the way?
No, could you move
Yes.
the lectern?
Sarah, how would you want this podium?
We're gonna need it for some
Can we scooch it like this? Is that better?
A little more?
Sarah, how are you feeling?
Switching to the other side, keep it up there.
Okay, it's staying. We'll move it. And maybe if, for the tech gods, we could actually put Secretary Cohen on both screens.
him in that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't even see
Okay,
ourselves.
so that's enough from me, and thanks everyone. We look forward to the conversation. We are gonna spend some time doing questions and discussion after Sarah and Secretary Cohen have a chance to have some initial conversation. So Sarah, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and thanks everyone.
David, can I jump in and say, give my best to your folks,
I would-
especially the former mayor of Portland.
That's right. I will say, they are busy tonight, so they couldn't come out. They had plans, but I appreciate the sentiment. For folks who know Pam Plum and Peter Plum, my parents. So, yeah, that's true.
Yes, thank you so much for being here, Secretary Cohen. I'm going to read a little bit about your distinguished bio, but you're in a home crowd here. And we all revere your life commitment to public service. So thank you for being here with us tonight. And I know that you already know this, but just let's remember the wonderful career that Secretary Cohen has had. He served as the Secretary of Defense between 1997 and 2001 under President Bill Clinton, making history as the first Republican to join a Democratic cabinet in modern times. Imagine that level of bipartisanship that we need today in these times. And prior to this, Cohen represented Maine in the US Senate for 18 years and in the House of Representatives for 6 years. Thank you so much for your lifetime of service to Maine. And throughout his career, Cohen has been deeply involved in shaping US foreign policy and national security strategies. During his tenure, we saw the largest warfare campaign since World War II in the Balkans and military operations on every continent. Cohen also chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee and has traveled extensively in his role as the head of the Cohen Group. We're so pleased that you could be here with us. And we have a lot of questions for you tonight, and we hope that you will help us understand the situation that we're in today. And having dedicated your life to service, you know that it takes significant leadership to handle the complex challenges of our time. What do you see as the most urgent global challenges that this new administration is confronting, and how should priorities be set?
Well, Sarah and David, thank you for inviting me and to, excuse me, those of you who have turned out this evening to participate in what you rightly describe as a conversation. I don't want to be in a position of trying to mount a podium and give a lecture, but rather speak to you, but also listen to you in terms of your own views, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the program. But the first thing that strikes me in terms of global issues is that the domestic agenda is as important as the global. In fact, they can't be separated. The fact is that everything we do in our domestic affairs will influence what we're able to do internationally or globally. And so the two, I think, are inseparable in terms of how I look at the world today. And I'd say the biggest challenge that we face is POGO. Under the Constitution, the government is supposed to defend the American people against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think the greatest domestic threat we face is us, in that we are so deeply divided, so polarized, that we have a president who has campaigned not to try to heal the country, the divisions, whether they're racial, ethnic, religious, cultural, but rather to divide them, to really exploit them. And what that has done is it not only divides our country from being able to come to any kind of a consensus, contributing to the, I would say, stagnation and dysfunction, but rather it hands a weapon to our adversaries that they can now feel free to exploit those divisions and are doing so without regard to any consequence. They're going and sending cyber bots into our system so that we continue to focus on all that divides us. So I would say the biggest challenge we have is how do we heal us? How do we try to bring together a country that's based upon diversity, yes, equity and inclusion, that
Yay!
we brought all of our people together, and we are a mixture of the world. And so that's hard to hold together, but you have to have some core principles. And I would say what has always made us special, why other countries want to be like us, want to come here, is because, yes, we have a great economy, but that's not only the reason they come here. And yes, we have a strong military, I think the best in the world, but they come here based on our professed ideals. The fact that we believe that everyone should have an equal opportunity, not an equal outcome, but an equal opportunity to be the best that we can be, to be whoever we are, and that we live under the rule of law so that we're all protected by those rules. And that's why our economy is strong, why people are investing in America, because we have the rule of law that will protect their investments. We have an SEC that will monitor what's going on in the stock market to make sure we're trying to prevent those who are corrupt or evil-minded to try to exploit the opportunity here for ill-gotten purposes. So it's our ideals which we have always held up. That American flag represents something that is intangible. I'll tell you one quick story, so I don't want to get off talking to you like a senator. And we have no limitations on what we can say. But I was over in South Korea on the eve of, it would be 2008 in November. It would have been a week before the election of Barack Obama. And I was sitting with a group of former heads of state. They had invited me to make a few remarks. And I sat next to a Korean cabinet member, South Korean cabinet member. He said, if Barack Obama gets elected president, and he used these exact words, he said, it'll be the reaffirmation of the American dream. I said, wow, I'm blown away by the reaffirmation of the American dream. And I said, well, why do you say that? He said, because if you can take the first African American who becomes president of the United States, that means anything is possible in America. And when he said that, I had a chill that went up the back of my spine. Wow, that's what we mean to the world, that anything is possible in this country. That someone like Obama, the first African American, mixed race, etc., it can become the president of the United States. And so that's what we send out to the rest of the world, that we're different, that we allow people to be as good as they can be and give them an opportunity to do that under the protection of the law. So that is what is at stake right now because we have elected a president by a majority of the vote in Electoral College. We have elected a person who doesn't believe in that, who believes in power and not under the rule of law. And so we are having to cope with that on a day-by-day basis. You're seeing him sign all of these executive orders, and people say, well, he's just doing what he promised to do. And that is true. He has promised to do all of these things, but most people didn't really understand the gravity of what that means for the lives of Americans and people the world over. And so he is moving as quickly as he can to not just disrupt. I mean, disruption can be good. And in fact, disruption is needed in many facets of our lives. But this disruption is different than destruction. And so when you're going to take down an agency, for example, he wanted to privatize the Veterans Administration, got an immediate reaction. Wait a minute, we don't do that to our veterans. And so he pulled back on that. And most immediately, an immediate freeze on all grants. And suddenly we have this dissent throughout the country and elsewhere saying, what does that mean for us? And pull back on it. I did a piece for the Bangor Daily News about a week ago, and I tried to outline what he has in mind for his program and how he will have to trim those because the reality of what he has said and what he wants to do is going to be more contentious than I think he counted on. And so when you say, for example, I want to get rid of all the immigrants in this country, illegal immigrants, but the word was on immigration. And in the minds of MAGA Republicans, that meant all foreign people for the most part, unless they were from Nordic countries. But what happened? You had Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy who said, but we need HB1 visas. And so suddenly you had a reaction on the part of the hardcore of the Republican Party saying, wait a minute, you're part of the replacement theory. You're letting people in under this visa program, and they're most likely not going to be white. They're going to be from countries like India and China, where they are putting an emphasis on science and technology, and Silicon Valley and the big companies in the AI world. They want those people from countries who are more educated in this field. So that's what was behind the new visa program. And you had Republicans that say, hey, that's a betrayal. We said no immigrants from other countries. They said, but we need the bright ones here. So you have a reaction on the part of Republicans, and you will see consistent reactions on each of the things that he tries to carry out. I'll stop there, but say, Sarah, just to the point, we have to heal ourselves. We have to try to find ways to bring the diversity together to reach some kind of a consensus or common ground. Otherwise, we're going to continue, I think, down a path of just back and forth and dysfunctionality that will follow as a result. On the international issues, they remain the same. We have to deal with Putin and a very imperialistic Russia. We have to deal with China that is a near peer competitor. Certainly at the economic level, it's getting there, but at the military level, it's starting to be a peer competitor. They are actually developing weapon systems far faster than we can and in numbers greater than we can ever match. So China will be a competitor at the global level as well as the regional level. And then you have obviously Iran, North Korea, and others. But the adversaries are out there. We know who they are and what their goals are. And then the question we have to decide is, who are we? What is our role in the world today? And we haven't decided that. I think President Trump has decided he wants to play big guy politics, power politics. He wants to be like Xi Jinping, and he wants to be like Vladimir Putin. In other words, they have absolute power over their people in both countries. And that is exactly what he wants to have as the chief executive in this country. And so he is going to just put people in who are loyal not to the Constitution, but to him. Fealty to him will be the only qualification that you'll have to have before you're allowed in the administration. And so that's, I think, a danger because all of us in this room, I know when I was growing up, we used to pledge allegiance every morning to the American flag and to the republic for which it stands. And now that's not what's going on. They're having to pledge allegiance to the President of the United States. So we're in a situation where we can try and raise our voices in objection to it, but I think it's pretty early. Once you start objecting to everything he's seeking to do, then you're falling victim to just being absolutely opposed to everything he's doing. And there are some things actually that he's doing right, and we have to give him some credit for that. And that is forcing our allies to pay more. Every Secretary of Defense during my life in politics has said, allies aren't doing enough. And they were right. Because when we formed NATO, it was supposed to be a 50-50 relationship. We put 50% in, the NATO countries put 50% in. It's not into a pot. It's simply they're saying that we will bear 50% of the responsibility of building up our respective military so we can act together in concert. And then it got to be 75-25 and then 80-20. And so I think that every Secretary of Defense, including myself, we went to a NATO and said, you got to do more. Well, it's hard to persuade democratic countries they have to do more when they can look to the United States. You're the big superpower, so you're the one that has to do more. So I think he did a good thing in pressing our allies. I don't like the way he did it. I don't like bullying in any form when you're dealing with friends, that you try persuasion and continue to persuade as best you can. But if you start to bully your friends, they will ultimately will resent you and at some point in time break from you. Let me stop there, Sarah. This is going to be a conversation and not a speech from me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that healing the nation and bringing diversity back into our national strength is important. And I think we'll probably get to that more when we open to Q&A. Hope others will ask about that. I did want to ask you more about our relationship with our allies. Particularly the US and NATO. It's not just about spending and getting allied nations to spend more, but what is the value that you see with continuing international cooperation? We did see Trump also recently pull us out of the World Health Organization, which was a big concern after we're coming out of the pandemic. And now this move toward freezing foreign assistance and being engaged internationally. How can we look at international cooperation through the lens of this new administration and still be constructive in our approach?
Well, when I was with the Clinton administration, we had a rule: multilateral whenever we can, unilateral whenever we must. That has been turned on its head. Now it's unilateral whenever we can, multilateral whenever we have to. And so when you decide that you're going to play America first, what does that mean? Every country wants to think, hey, it's Britain first, it's Germany first. No leader of any country says, I want to be second or third. They all want to be number one in what they do. And so for us to say America first in every aspect of our dealing with our allies presents a real challenge for us because they have constituents. They are democracies. They have to respond to their constituency. And people don't like to be told what they have to do. They want to do it based upon a willingness, a democratic willingness. So I've always believed we have to really nurture relationships. We need to nurture alliances, because that expands our own defensive perimeter. If you're acting alone back here and you have no bases in Germany, you have no bases in South Korea, you have no bases in Japan, well, what happens when you have to take on Russia? What happens to those countries there where you have no infrastructure and willingness to accept your troops on their territory? So this has always been expanding our capability with democratically minded countries. So we're protecting their values as well as our interests. But President Trump has said, I'm not so sure about NATO, it's obsolete. Well, that sends a message to the NATO countries. Wait a minute, you mean the biggest player, a guy on the block, no longer wants to be part of NATO, to lead NATO? What does that do for us in dealing with Vladimir Putin, who has, 5,000 nuclear weapons at his disposal? What does it do for our security? And the same thing would be said in South Korea. President Trump has said he wants to pull our troops out of Germany, he wants to pull them out of South Korea, and wants to know why we're in Japan. So each of those countries will say, well, if we can't depend upon the United States to protect us with its massive military, with its nuclear umbrella, if necessary, then we're kind of on our own and we have to make our own deal. So if you're looking at the Indo-Pacific region, they would look around and say, China's the biggest, that's our biggest neighbor, that's our biggest trading partner, and they live in the neighborhood, and they've got 1.4 billion people, and they build the biggest navy in the world right now in terms of ships. So if the US is not going to be with us and commit to us through treaties and alliances, maybe we make the best deal for ourselves, which would be aligning with China, not standing up to Chinese expansionism, et cetera, in the South China Sea, East China Sea, or in Taiwan. Or the president wants Taiwan to pay for its own defense. So when you start sending that signal, you're causing other countries to scramble, to say, what do we do now? Because we have real threats out there to our existence, to our freedom. And if the United States is not going to play the role that it has played since World War II, we have to make other arrangements. How do we do that? Who do we line up with? Can we strike a deal with India? Does India have a military that would offset what China has? Well, not at this point. And so you start going through and analyze all the countries who have been with us, and they say, we're not so sure about the United States commitment any longer. So just sending that signal, not that the President Trump would carry through. He might badger and use this as a tool to extract more concessions out of our allies or out of our adversaries as well. But the minute you say these things, you cause people to doubt you, and doubt causes instability, and instability is not good when you're looking at a world as turbulent as ours.
Yeah, thank you for that realistic picture of what's at stake. One question I have for you is about bipartisanship and the role of Congress in trying to bring some consensus to these challenges that we're seeing, particularly with our allies, wondering if we're with them or not. How do you see a path toward a bipartisan consensus on our foreign policy platform?
Well, I guess we would start with Ukraine. I have taken the position that what happens in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine. Namely, here's a country, a struggling democracy, trying to establish itself to a Western culture, Western economic system, and Western values, under assault by Vladimir Putin, who has broken international law by changing geographical boundaries through force. So that's a violation of international law. Unfortunately, President Trump has not uttered one word of condemnation for that. So our NATO allies have said, well, if you allow this to take place, who's next? Because his appetite is not going to stop with Ukraine. You've got the Baltic countries. You've got Poland that's there. Hungary has sort of moved more into his area of influence than our own. But each of the countries in Europe now have to make a decision. Are we still going to fight for democracy? And Ukraine is our prime example. Or do we make accommodations with Putin? Or do we make accommodations with Xi Jinping, who is now a senior partner in the law firm of China and Russia? So they have to make these kind of calculations, and it spills over not just in military terms, but we have tried to persuade the Europeans, by way of example, our NATO countries, don't do business with China. Do not send them this high technology we're trying to prevent them from acquiring. And we just seen how that has broken down. But the Europeans say, well, we have a different view and a different relationship with China than you do. So we're not so sure we want to take on China on your behalf or with you when the Chinese have a way of punishing us in terms of not allowing our goods into their country as well. So you then start to see that these relationships, they may be military in terms of security, but they also spill over into the economic well-being of each of the countries. And so when you stick a finger in the eye of the NATO countries, saying, we're not so sure we're going to be with you, or as he said, if you don't pay your dues, which there are no dues, then I don't care what the hell Russia does with you. Well, to a NATO member saying, if we're not able to meet the 2% or now 5%, he's upping the ante, then you're on your own. And he's also saying, in essence, if you pay, you can play. So it's one of those things, it's also an extortion type of arrangements where if you don't pay, we're not coming to help you out when you get attacked by Putin. So again, it may be on his part, it may be just tactics, rhetorical challenges saying, do it my way, or you're going to pay a penalty for it. And the penalty would be removal of our security guarantee or weakening it. And you'll have to figure out where you go on your own. Well, we've known that, and yet the American people said we like what he's doing. And I just want to touch one other subject before we get off this. The president has really tied in to something that's very deep in our society right now, the so-called grievance, and it's particularly white grievance. I would say it should be blue-collar grievance without regard to color. But globalization has really driven a deep wedge in our country. And I think all of us are responsible for that. When I go back to looking when President Nixon opened up China, business rushed in and said, wow, we've got, at that time, 1.1 billion people. What a potential consumer group that would be for us. So if we go in and help lift up their economy, we'll have a consumer market of 1.2 or 3, or now 4 billion people. And so we didn't think about what damage we were doing to our own industrial base. And the people who were part of that base were out of jobs. And you drive through, my wife and I drove through Ohio this past year, and some parts of it are ghost towns. And that used to be the industrial base of the country through the Midwest and Ohio, Michigan, and other states. So there was a deep resentment there toward the, quote, Eastern elite establishment, saying, you guys sold us out. You put your money over in China and Asia. You built factories over there, and now we're out of work, and you don't give a damn about us. And so that has been building for some time now. So this globalization, from a macroeconomic level, has lifted up hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and especially in China, I might add, and most of the other Asian nations. But what we didn't consider is what kind of safety net did we have for those people who are going to lose their jobs, who are not either young enough or capable enough to adjust or adapt to the information age. And so that deep hole that's been created by globalization has seen its limits. So now we're trying to decouple, de-globalize as such, and it's not going to be easy. And yet you can see where that grievance is and what the president was able to do in saying, I'm your champion. These guys from Wall Street and the intellectual elite, the ones who have promoted globalization, they are the enemies that I'm going to seek retribution against. So there is that element we've got to somehow overcome. And I'll talk about that with the audience a little bit. But those are some of the issues that are really dividing us, and we've got to find a way to bridge that. And I think it can be done, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's certainly evident not only in the president, but in the Vice President Vance, who wrote the book Hillbilly Elegy, which goes at great length into what you just said about the challenges to the U.S. industrial base as well. So thank you for that. Just moving on a little bit from the role of the president, you had a very special role in leading the Department of Defense and as a leader of the Pentagon. If we could just shift our thoughts for a moment to the new Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, who had a very contentious confirmation process. How do you see his role in the Pentagon at this moment in time, in terms of military readiness and standards? And we have a unique thing in our new secretary that he did write a short book that kind of questioned the rule of law and some of the things that the previous administration had done. But from your vantage point, how do you see the challenges that he faces in leading the Pentagon at this time?
Well, first, he has to have the confidence of the president. And you have a number of audiences you have to speak to. And the President of the United States, obviously the man who just appointed you. You also have to gain the confidence of the uniformed military. Now, Pete Hegseth has served in the military, and I give him credit for doing so. He's highly educated, well-trained, but he has a philosophy that is quite different than what we have tried to create over the last 50, 60, 70 years. So there was a great article, by the way, in the Atlantic magazine, and it was by Elliot Cohen, no relation. But he came out very strongly and said, we don't need or want a warrior class. We need to continue to have a soldier class. And the difference we pointed out is that we have rules of law, rules of war. We have adopted a policy. We don't torture prisoners. We don't waterboard prisoners. We don't cut off their fingers. We don't pull their nails, etc. We have rules that we abide by because we want to set a standard that's higher than other countries may follow. If they're going to burn us in a cage, do we then burn them in a cage? If they're going to engage in this form of torture, do we do the same? And so what we have tried to do is raise standards to say, no, our military is trained by the rule of war and the rules of law, and we're going to abide that. And if our military violates that, they'll be held accountable through military tribunals. That has been the ethic that we have promoted, one again of rules that we need to abide by. And I think the new Secretary of Defense says, I want a warrior culture. I don't want to be concerned about that. I want to let other nations know that we'll be as brutal as they are. And so I think President Trump also supports that. So that's one of the reasons I think he's there. You may recall that President Trump appointed, excuse me, appointed someone who serves in my firm right now, Jim Mattis. Jim Mattis is a four-star general who was the commander of our forces in CENTCOM and elsewhere. But he had a nickname called Mad Dog Mattis. And he hated the name. The reason he was given that moniker by his troops is that he was always in the front of the battle. If I'm going to take my Marines into battle, I'm going to be there with them on the front lines. And they loved him for that. They respected him for that. He's not sitting back in some office down in CENTCOM and in Florida. He was there on the battlefield with them. And so President Trump was obviously enthralled with that moniker of Mad Dog. And he found out that, no, Madison is a warrior, but he's also a scholar. He has some 6,000 books in his library, and he's read almost every one of them and can quote from every one of them. And so he found that Mattis, contrary to being a mad dog, was more of a priest or a monk who spends his time reading the histories and the biographies and going back to ancient literature and Sun Tzu and from the Art of War, etc. So he grew disenchanted with Mattis because Mattis said, well, you really shouldn't do that. And I'll give you one example. I was doing an interview with BBC, and I was sitting down at the table, and Caddy Kay was doing the interview with me. And suddenly, as the camera's about to go on, they slipped me a piece of paper saying that the president has ordered American troops, all American troops, out of Syria. And they said, what do you think about that? And I kind of waffled my way through, didn't know what was going to happen. And I got off the phone, and for the first time, I called General Mattis because I have a rule that I never place a call to the Pentagon. If they want to call me, they can, but I don't want to place one to them. I don't want to interfere or intervene. And I said, Jim, what's going on? He said, well, the president has ordered me to remove our troops immediately out of Syria. He said, I've asked him to do it over a period of a phased time. So we have our allies there. The Brits are with us. Others are with us. They are at risk. If we do this on short notice, we're creating a real dilemma for us and for them. So I need a little bit of time, weeks or a couple of months to manage this. And he went into he told me he was going to see the president the next day, and he did. He walked into the Oval Office and said, Mr. President, I'll make one last pitch to you. Please give me a time where I can do this on a safe basis, phased-in basis. And the president said, no, tomorrow. And so that's when he tendered his resignation. So he had those kind of resistance during that term, that first of his terms. And now the question is, will he have that kind of resistance for those who are committed to rules as opposed to orders? And because everyone in the military, they're trained, yes, sir, follow your order, salute and follow the order, unless they feel it's illegal or it is so extraordinary that it's antithetical to everything they believe in. Then they can say, no, sir, I can't do that. So those have been the kind of the guidelines for our uniformed officers. So now the question becomes, the Supreme Court has pretty much given the president carte blanche authority, power, to do whatever he feels he wants to do without regard to the consequences. And so now the question is, will that affect the morale of our military? Because I want to say, for me, the most important thing that I spent so much time with our military, don't politicize it. The last institution that we have that should not be politicized is our military. It's our greatest asset in terms of influencing world affairs, that they know we've got the best and the brightest and the most capable people who are disciplined, who follow rules, but legal rules, who will not engage in barbarian behavior, etc. There are going to be exceptions, they'll be punished. So what I don't want to see take place is to have the military politicized. And I fear that that's what, and I've spoken about this publicly, I'm not sharing anything that I haven't said before, but that the president wants my generals, my military. And no, they're not yours. They're America's military. They're America's generals. And so to make them kind of, these are mine, these are my justice appointees, this is my IRS, all of the neutral instruments of power in our country should remain neutral. There are other, obviously, agencies that are more political in nature, but the ones we depend upon, the military in particular, should not be partisan or political. And so I think that the new Secretary of Defense, he's got to earn the support of the military, the chairman and the members of the Joint Chiefs. He's already said he's prepared to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And because of DEI, anyone who supports diversity, equity, inclusion is going to be fired. Well, that raises other issues. He doesn't believe you, Sarah, or the women who are in our audience should ever be in combat. Well, the issue is, what is combat today? If you're talking about mano to mano, man to man in the trenches, saber to saber, that's one thing. But most wars today are not fought that way. And most wars of the future will not be fought that way. We have women who are flying our high performance aircraft as well as men do. We have women who are sailing our biggest ships as well as men do. We have women who are flying drones as well as men do. And so when you say, I don't want women in combat, what do you really mean? Do you want to make women simply in supervisory or supportive services, administrative type of jobs, and not in combat? So that's an issue in terms of what the role of women are going to be going forward. They are vital. I will tell you, they are vital to our ability to carry out the missions that we've assigned to them. So that will have an impact there. There'll be another impact in terms of he feels that black and brown members of the service have been given promotions without merit. So he thinks it's kind of an affirmative action military, that brown people and black people don't deserve those leadership positions. Now, he said that as a general statement, but if I had been a member of the Senate, I would say, well, how about General Powell? Was he an affirmative action baby? Did he get to be a four-star general and lead our military because he got preferential treatment? Or I could go through all the list, Tuskegee Airmen down the line. And so our military is made up of us. They reflect us, that we have women, we have gays in the military, we have blacks, we have brown, we have people from all walks of life who want to serve our country. So the notion you're sending out a signal that it's going to be a warrior class, women not included, well, trans are out, and then you'll have to get to the issue: can gays openly serve in the military as they once were not allowed to? I'm raising these issues, and none of them may come about. It all may be rhetoric. But I think that the Secretary of Defense has to, again, he has to serve the President of the United States. He has to gain the confidence of the uniformed leadership. He has to communicate with Capitol Hill. One of the most important things to understand is Congress has the purse strings. You have to persuade members of Congress this is in their interests in terms of what the administration is proposing. And they have a say in this as well, a big say. And then you have to persuade your allies. So you've got all of these different audiences: the president, the uniformed military, Capitol Hill, allies, and adversaries. You have to go to meet the adversaries as well. And so you carry with you the power of that office. It's enormous. The power of Secretary of Defense it's enormous when you fly to any country and they see that big plane that comes in that says United States of America. They roll out the red carpet because they know what that means. And we want to make sure we can maintain that to all of our allies, and especially to our adversaries, saying these guys are serious. They're capable, they're well-trained, they have the best technology, and they're well-led. So that's what the next Secretary of Defense, the new one, and every Secretary of Defense has had to measure up to. And we've been fortunate over the years that we've had that ability to do so, and people who are willing to do that.
Thank you for that. It is a very unique circumstance that we have a military where we have women serving and people of all backgrounds, and who probably feel demoralized by some of these statements now. And that is a difficult thing to think about. How do we inspire people to sign up for the military, to consider running for office and taking part in public service when there is this rhetoric that some people may be less than? But we have seen over the years a decline in the number of people that are choosing public service or government service or military service as a way of life. And how do you think, despite the divisiveness, that we can inspire people to a life of public service?
Well, I think we have to start taking courses in civility. We have to start treating each other with respect. And I could take the rest of the evening to talk about the use of language, for example. We have become very angry all the time. And what's happened with all the algorithms, they reward anger. And so you have angry words coming from the very top. Well, now people it's called, to me, it's a degradation of the language. You can now swear on television. You can say foul words on television. You can say things that in our time, my time, were unspeakable. And we had Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the senator from New York. He said we were defining deviancy down, meaning that deviant behavior, aberrant behavior that was once off the chart, you can't do that. Well, now you can. So we have normalized anger and um, rough language, I think almost pornographic language that we're using to describe each other. So we need a course in anger management, but civility. We've got to start treating people who disagree with us. Say, okay, I disagree, but let's find a way that maybe you're right on this, and I can adjust what I say, and can't we find some common ground? So that's going to take a whole societal change because right now anger is rewarded. Almost every facet of our lives, it's anger that gets the attention. It's the headlines that get the news. It's who can make the most outrageous statement, who can then go on a podcast and get more coverage. And we don't reward civility. We don't reward excellence. We are now downgrading merit. If you look at some of the nominees who've been, and I'll just keep it categorical in nature, but many of the nominees that are posted for these high positions are not qualified by character or training and education, but they're being appointed. And in getting back to the Congress, I think many people are acting because they are out of agreement with the president. Many are fearful. Many are fearful. Some of the people that I serve with have left because they fear not only they'll be primaried, and you can, you lose an election, that's, tough luck, go back and get another job. But they fear for their lives and their family. And that's what's getting dangerous now with the language we're using toward one another. When was the time you had to get protection? Um, think about Anthony Fauci. You might disagree with Dr. Fauci. I happen to know him. I happen to like him. I admire his public service over the years, but he's had to have 24/7 security protection because the president said he was wrong and bad and gave improper advice on COVID. So now he's living in fear. He and his wife and family living in fear. You just saw where the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, they've removed his protective detail because the president was angry that he felt that he was disloyal by calling the Chinese counterpart to say, hey, relax, we're not in any way threatening you by our dysfunction over here during our election. And so these things are taking place now where John Bolton, I don't necessarily agree with John Bolton. He's a hardcore conservative in the best sense of the word, but now he's a target because he was serving as national security advisor when they took out an Iranian leader. So we have got to get back to the notion that public service, and here is where I'm really getting a soapbox. When when you run for public office, you become what I call a trustee. You were entrusting me with affairs where you are paying taxes for me to exercise judgment in the best interest of the people of Maine and hopefully the country. So I was a trustee. I was a fiduciary. And what do the judges have always said? A trustee owes you something higher than the morals of the marketplace, something higher. Not honesty alone, but the punctilio of an honor the most sensitive. In other words, it's fancy language, but saying trustees are up here. They owe you fidelity to you, not to them, not to those who are supporting them, but to you, the American people. And I feel what's taking place now is that it's not fidelity to the American people or to the Constitution, but to individuals. And that's a danger, I think, for all of us going forward. So getting back to public service, I have a lot of young people in my office that I'm bringing along, and they're the future of my own small firm. But I tell them about Dirigo, or if you're not from Maine, Durago. Um, I lead, we lead. And this is what Maine is known for. Believe it or not, when I travel the world and I say I'm from Maine, people react, oh, well, that's a beautiful state. Those are wonderful people. They are hardworking. They are honest. And that's our reputation around the world, spar none. Spare none. People look to Maine as saying, these are tall and straight as the pine trees. You know, we love your lobstermen, your lumbermen. We love the people there. They're honest, they're open. Um, and so we have that reputation. So I tell people that I meet that we set the standard. As Maine goes, the nation doesn't go right now, but it used to. And I tell the young people that I speak with at the University of Maine, I have a kind of a chair up there, that you have an obligation. You can't be on the sidelines. There are no witness to history now. You've got to be a player. And if you don't lead, someone else is going to lead, and then you'll be a follower. And then you may follow someone you don't really believe in, but you're going to have to follow because they're leading and you're not. So getting back to leading, we have to decide what kind of a country do we want? I mean, who are we? What kind of a country do we want, and what role in the world do we want to play? Now, when I was in law school, John Kennedy was president, and he inspired me. And he had this rhetoric: let every nation know we'll pay any price, bear any burden, defend any friend, oppose any foe, in order to ensure the success, survival of liberty. Soaring rhetoric, and it got us in trouble. We got to Vietnam, and then we paid a heavy price for that. So we went from that soaring rhetoric to, when I was in office, I was a reluctant sheriff. I don't want to get involved in any wars, any conflicts, unless I have to. And so I was a reluctant sheriff. Along came 9/11. What happened? We had our towers taken down. We had the Pentagon attack. And George Bush 43 came in and said, I'm the Texas Terminator. We're going after these folks. We're going after those in Afghanistan. We're going after those in Iraq, which I can talk about as a separate matter. And then we went through that phase, and along comes Barack Obama and says, hey, wait a minute. Terminator's too tough here. We're going to adopt a policy. We're going to lead from behind. I don't know what that meant. We're going to lead from behind. You lead from the front, not behind. And he said, just don't do stupid stuff. And I'm cleaning that up. But that's what he said. We just don't do stupid stuff. That was our philosophy. And then came President Trump, who said, no, I want to do the following things. And then came Biden, who says, we're back. I'm an internationalist. America is back. We're believing again in the rule of law. We're going to do these things with our allies. We're going to oppose what Putin is doing in Ukraine. We're going to oppose what Israel is doing in terms of not taking care enough in terms of protecting collateral damage, human beings. And so he was trying to, as he was reaffirming our relationship with Israel, saying, don't go so far that you create more terrorists in the future than you're killing, which is something that we always have to be concerned about. So we go through these phases, and right now what you have to say is, what's our role? I think our role is still, it has to lead, because when we remove our presence in other areas, then what happens is there's a vacuum, and nature hoards the vacuum. Someone else is going to fill it. And the people who are going to fill it are not going to be those that we admire or agree with, but who pose a serious threat to our existence. And let me stop there because I see you looking at your watch. So let's continue.
Well, thank you so much. I am looking at the watch because we have all these wonderful guests here with us, and I'm sure they've enjoyed hearing from you, but I do want to give them a chance
Sure.
to ask
Okay.
questions. And so if you do have a question for Secretary Cohen, would you please stand up and state your question loudly? Anyone have a question that you would like to ask?
And I want your name and social security number and your address. I can seek retribution.
Okay, maybe not the social security number, but if you can say your name and you want to say something about any affiliation you have. I saw a hand raised. Can you stand up, please? And
Firstly, thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. Gomri Rastampur, World Affairs Board member, and I'm Kurd, and I grew up in Iran. And I have two questions for you. One of them is nuclear weapon, Iran nuclear weapon been on the table forever. Just I would like to know that what is Mr. President reaction, and I would like to know your view. And then for the securities, I mean national security. We know that the UN Security Councils are the decision maker. We know that the president is here, but the UN Security Councils are the decision maker. How we can challenge them to make a better decision, because everything just goes on their consent, and the 5 members, I would like to know your view. Thank you for your service.
Are you talking about the UN Security Council or the National Security Council?
UN Security
UN.
Council, the 5 permanent members.
Well, it's no longer functional. If it ever was, I guess it was initially, but what we now have is both China and Russia wield the veto, as do we from time to time, but it's hard to get a consensus when now you have Putin and Xi Jinping aligned as allies, partners, I should say, rather than allies, but partners. So getting by the Security Council, I think, is becoming more difficult, which raises an issue. The Security Council gives you legitimacy in terms of what is seen as being a legal forum. And when you act outside the Security Council, you're looking like you're evading the law. You're taking the law into your own hands. A coalition of the willing, for example. Sometimes you can't get Security Council unanimity, so you say, let's have a coalition of the willing. The coalition of the willing is more efficient, it's more effective, but it's not seen as being legitimate. So you have this conundrum that we have where you want to go to the UN Security Council, make your case, and if you can't persuade them at that point, then you have to say, okay, we have to go with a coalition of the willing. So who are the coalition of the willing? Usually democratic countries. If you look at the coalition of the willing when we went into Bosnia, when we are going now into or helping Ukraine, it's a coalition of the willing that's providing the support. And so the UN Security Council, as a result of the way it's formatted now, it should be more members included. I think India should be included, a country that is that big and that influential. I think Brazil has a role of membership in it. But I don't know it's ever going to take place. So I don't have to tell you other than who makes the decisions. The Security Council doesn't make the decision. It's the presidents of the 5 players. Those are the people who make the decisions. And as far as the United States is concerned, the president has a National Security Council. They should be filled with competent people, really highly competent people who don't have a personal agenda, a political agenda, other than protecting our national security. And what happens, all of these issues get funneled into the National Security Council, and that Security Council makes a recommendation to the president. The members of the cabinet, of which I was one, and Secretary Albright, we had the so-called ABC, Albright, Berger, and Cohen, as opposed to the television network. We would go to the president. He had a recommendation coming from the Security Council. If we disagreed with what the president was proposing, we had a chance to go to him directly. The National Security Advisor would say, can't you and Secretary Albright work it out? Because we didn't always agree. We're great friends, we didn't always agree. State Department, different view than Defense Department. So Berger would say, sit down, you two, and work it out. I don't want to take every issue on which you disagree and put it before the president. That's a waste of his time. So we tried to make our case to the president if we disagreed. Most of the time we agreed. But that National Security Council are the ones who made recommendations to the president. So it's the president, it's Putin, it's Xi Jinping, et cetera, and the leaders of the United Nations Security Council. I think it's become less functional and therefore more coalitions, and that has its own problems, I mentioned.
Yeah, thank you.
Iranian question.
Yeah, there was also a part 2 of that question about Iran's nuclear weapons and your thoughts on this. briefly
think
before we-
most people fear, legitimately so, that Iran will get a nuclear weapon because Iran is a I think an imperial country in the sense it wishes to dominate the entire region. There was a Persian Empire. The Iranian people are expansionists. All of the countries in the region, whether it's UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, all of they fear that Iran, with a nuclear weapon, would dominate the region. Now, there was a deal that was made. I didn't necessarily agree with the deal that Barack Obama made. I didn't think it went far enough. But once we made a deal, I think you stick with it. You make sure that it's enforceable. You make sure that it's being properly monitored. You make sure as best you can there's no cheating. But Iran was a lot further from making a nuclear weapon 10 years ago than they are today. There is real disagreement how many weeks or months Iran is from being able to put together a nuclear warhead for the missile capability they have. So that would be very destabilizing. I don't think Israel is going to sit back and wait. It will then require whether the U.S. is going to participate should the Israelis ever decide to launch a strike again against Iran to try to take out their nuclear weapons research capability. It's spread throughout Iran. It's not in one place. It's deeply buried. I don't believe the Israelis have the capability today to be able to get at those deeply buried. They would need our assistance. The question is, would the United States do it? And then you have the other issues of what will be the response of the Iranians should we do them? What would be the asymmetric response on their part to the U.S. here or where we are globally? But that's another issue altogether. I think that Trump will try to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I think Iran is in a very difficult position right now militarily. They have had their air defenses decapitated. Israel was successful in taking out their air defenses, meaning they are naked unto aerial assaults going forward from the Israelis and or the United States. So they are vulnerable, particularly right now. That may be why they would be more interested in renewing a deal of a different dimension. But I think most people, Israel in particular, will say Iran can never get a nuclear weapon because they only have to hit us once and we're gone. And so they live in a very dangerous neighborhood. They've got 5 different sources of countries who don't wish them well. And so they've got to be concerned about anybody who has the ability to extinguish their country. So they won't allow them to go forward. But I think Trump is in a position now. And you asked me about challenges and opportunities. I think Trump has an opportunity to do great things in the Middle East because Syria, you've seen what happened to Syria, is now collapsed with the Bashar al-Assad element now in Moscow. And so you have a new regime coming in Syria, perhaps with the help of Turkey and other countries in the region. They'll be able to have a more responsible, solid relationship country in Syria. And then Trump has an opportunity, depends how he handles the Israelis. But Israel, let me make a couple of quick comments. Israel is never going to be secure or safe unless there is a Palestinian state that's at peace with them. The Palestinians are never going to have a state unless they recognize the existence of Israel. Pretty simple. Those are the two things that play here. I think President Trump has an opportunity to work with the Saudis, who are the big players in the region in terms of money, the UAE, Bahrain, also Qatar, and other countries in the region to really make a deal with the Israelis to say, we will all support Israel and their right to exist in security. But part of that deal is giving the Palestinians an opportunity to have a life as well. They have nothing at this point. They have been destroyed in terms of Hamas and what the damage done there. Hezbollah has been decapitated. And so there's an opportunity here to build a relationship with the Arab countries that are supportive of Israel rather than seeing them as an enemy of the Muslim population, the Arab population. I think that's there. I don't know that President Trump will will take advantage of it. But I think it's there for the taking, and I think Israel will be far safer, more secure, and the Middle East will be far less volatile and dangerous if they do it that way.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on, we didn't get to the Middle East earlier, but it's an
Well, we
important.
did. Yeah, we did. Wait.
There's a lot more to say about that, but I saw a lot of hands up and I see you standing here. Yeah, please say your name and speak your question loudly.
My name is Maynard Sharon. I live in Hollis. And thank you, Mr. Cohen. My question is, tomorrow morning, what should I and everybody else in this room do? What should Governor Mills do? What should Susan Collins do?
Well, they should carry out their responsibilities that they've pledged to you, and that is to bring their intelligence and capability to resolve problems that affect the people of Maine and go beyond that as far as the United States Senate is concerned. And Governor Mills should do what she's pledged to do, and that is to find a way. I mean, we're in we're in a country that believes in building compromise. Consensus is not a great word. People don't like the word compromise. That thinks you're a mushy middle. But there's no way to live unless you live with a compromise with people who have a different viewpoint than you. We have two great parties. Those parties are going to continue to fight. We need two parties, two really valid and viable parties. Because the Republicans in our philosophy say, just take the hands off and get rid of the regulation. Let us do what we do best, and that's make money, create prosperity. Democrats say, hey, wait, if we do that, you're into a state of nature. And only the strong survive, and the rest are left in the sidelines. So we need regulation to make sure that you don't use your strength to oppress those who are less strong or less capable. So those two parties have different views of what the role of government is. And so we go back and forth. Sometimes you have a Republican governor, sometimes you have a Democratic governor. And that's the way it is because most people live between the 40-yard lines. We're basically, in my judgment, a slightly right of center country, philosophically, or slightly left of center. When either party goes too far into the end zone, all you get is stagnation. You get what one writer used to call demosclerosis. You've got the Democratic arteries clogged with sclerotic material. So what we have to do is try to say, I've always worked, by the way, with Democrats, including Senator Mitchell. I think he has spoken to your group. But with Gary Hart, you remember that name? Gary Hart was a senator. Think of how the standards that he had to comply with compared to what is happening today. But I took the attitude, I said, look, if a Democrat has a good idea, why shouldn't we adopt it? If I have a good idea, why shouldn't they be willing to adopt it? Or at least some version of it. Say, hey, it's not what I want, but it's pretty good compromise. I can get most of what I want, and I'll fight for the rest next time. And so I think what Governor Mills should do, or any governor should do, is represent her people or their people and say they're elected because you have faith in them. You have confidence that they will exercise judgment on your behalf. They will be a good trustee. And when they lose your faith and your confidence, you'll say, get rid of them. I'm not going to vote for you again. That's how we do business. So I think as far as Governor Mills is concerned, that she just keeps doing what she's doing, and Republicans, they can challenge it. She could say, that's a pretty good idea, Republicans, and I think I'll make a deal with you. And that's how we function. At the national level, I expect that Susan Collins will represent the people of Maine, saying what are her values? Why did you elect her? What do you expect from her in terms of her exercise of judgment? Because she's got to come back to you and say, hey, you think I did a good job? You say, hell no. Well, you won't elect her again, re-elect her. And that's our system. So I would say, what do you do tomorrow? You raise your voice. You write to call the governor and say, hey, I don't think you're doing a good job, and I want to see this and this and this. Same thing for Senator Collins or any of our 4 representatives.
Yeah, thank you for that. A lot of us have been calling and writing our representatives lately. All right, in the back.
Me?
Can the gentleman in the far back get, sorry, in the Navy, you? Yes, you in the far
Senator
back.
Cohen, my name is Tex Heuser.
I can't.
Can you come forward a little?
I'm a member of the Citizen Climate Lobby. So we try to, on a bipartisan basis, try to influence Congress regarding the danger of global warming. And I think you would agree that global warming is a national security issue.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering, I mean, we're not going to give up, you know, despite the new policies, but what can we do now with Congress to try to still make some progress?
Did you hear that okay?
Yeah, thank you. I think you have to continue to raise high the roof beams. You got to continue to raise your voice. Global warming has been dismissed as a hoax. I think everybody in this room, or almost everybody, can agree it's no hoax. It's real, and we've seen it example after example of what's taking place. And you said it right. It's a national security issue. There was a paper that was written, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago by a number of our four-star generals and admirals. And they talked about water as a national security issue, climate change as a national security issue. If you think about what's happening to the world, we're running out of fresh water. Mother Nature is not a small d Democrat. She doesn't disperse the benefits of society equally. And so you have some countries that are running dry and turning into deserts, and you have other countries that are being overwhelmed with water. And so it's a national security issue because those people who are either without water, what are they doing? They're moving. Where are they moving to? The safest place they can find, which is across the border. What do the people who are on this side of the border say? Stay out. And so that's when you have conflicts taking place in the world because water becomes a national security issue. And we are wasting it. I happen to represent a company that deals with water and teaches companies around the world how to conserve, how to treat, how to monitor, how to reuse, and to save billions of gallons every year. In any event, it's an ethic. It's a moral ethic that we have to have, that we are plundering this planet. And you can't make a pathway to the future by plundering our resources. And that's what we are doing. And so you have to keep talking about it. You have to keep writing about it. You have to press our representatives saying, you have to support these issues.
Yes, thank you.
Just got a note. I have to turn off my humidifier. It's leaking. Yeah.
Well, let me take that opportunity to just give us a pause and say we have less than 10 minutes left in our program time with you. So what I'm going to do is just take a few questions together from our membership and then give you a few minutes to respond to more than one.
Would you give me just 5 minutes so I can take care of business right here?
Absolutely. That's right.
So let's grab some questions and go together.
Yeah, okay. You want to grab some questions? For those of you who still have questions for Secretary Cohen, maybe you can just say what their question is while he's,
Yeah.
yes.
I wanted to ask him about globalization. So I went to the Camden conference last year and they talked about nearshoring and onshoring and bringing back industry. And in one of my college classes, we talked about maybe the reason we don't have global conflict at the level we saw during World War II was because there's an economic disincentive to attack people you are economically linked to. So I wanted to ask him if he sees a higher risk of conflict because countries around the world are nearshoring and putting industry back in their own territory. So is there now, well, you know, if I attack China and I'm not reliant on them for their minerals, is there less of a punishment for doing so?
Great question.
That's a great question.
Other
Okay,
questions?
another question?
Yeah, I'm imagining a conversation, all of us gathered 4 years from now, 2029. The Democrats have won the presidency, the Congress, and the Senate. And we're doing a postmortem on that. Looking back, what did we not see? What were his vulnerabilities? What mistakes should we perhaps have anticipated? It caused the collapse of President Trump and his party?
Ooh.
I need
Great
something to
question.
look forward to.
These are difficult
wish.
questions. Okay, what else? Another question.
Well, it sort of tags on to that. When I
Okay.
read that the three men sitting behind President Trump at the inauguration have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population, it gives me pause because wealth inequality really contributes to social unrest.
All right.
So I'm just gonna warn folks that we actually need to finish up around 7:10 because it turns out this amazing office space that Preddy thankfully has let us use. By the way, has everyone seen the view out of this place?
It's amazing.
Wow. So thank you, Preddy. It turns out though, we actually need to clear out at 7:15, so we need to finish up at 7:10.
So what I'm gonna do, David,
Yeah.
is turn this to you to summarize.
Okay, here we go.
Secretary Cohen,
We got this.
the last few questions, because we have to leave sooner than later. I'm gonna let David close it out with you, Secretary Cohen, but thank you so much. And we have a few more topics
Yeah.
that we could address quickly.
So I think just in the lightning round, Secretary Cohen, I'll summarize them in two. One is, as countries are bringing manufacturing back in and globalization is on retreat, is that actually a less stable place because we're less interconnected? That's one question. And another question is, looking out into the future, I'm gonna not do this question over here because it's really good. However, I will say, how do we feel about the fact that there is such concentration of wealth in the United States and particularly perhaps in some key players in this administration? So those are two quick ones to finish up on.
Okay, quickly on the inequality. Jack Kennedy said in his one of his inaugural speech, actually, he said, if we can't help the many who are poor, we cannot hope to save the few who are rich. And I think that applies today as well. This income inequality will be our downfall. You're having so much wealth concentrated at the top, so much little coming down to the vast majority of the people. It's not sustainable, not as a democracy. And so I think it invites a counter-revolution to it. It will, if the masses go unprotected, they feel they're unequal in terms of opportunity, they feel that the system is rigged against them, there'll be a revolt against that ultimately. The tax system is atrocious in terms of maximizing that inequality, and I think that the changes there are going to be hard to come by, but that's something that everyone needs to turn to. The other question?
Is bringing, as globalization is in retreat, is that a more or less stable system for global relations?
Well, there are two things here. I'll try to be as brief as I can. Globalization, what happened is we were the manufacturer of the weapon systems of the world, and we were selling our planes and our tanks. And every country said, well, we don't want to just be consumers. We want to be producers, or at least co-producers. So if you want us to buy your very expensive systems, give us a piece of the action. Can we build a small part of this plane or this tank, this whatever? And so it became an economic necessity that other countries were not going to buy our system if they couldn't have a piece of the action. Well, when you have a piece of the action like that, what happens? You're spreading out your lines, your supply lines. You're becoming more fragile. And we saw what happens when how easy it is to the supply lines, there's a conflict wherever, suddenly, oh, they can't produce that. We ran out of toilet paper, you remember, during COVID. And we had trouble producing masks and so forth. So when you parcel out production capability to other countries, you are on the one hand strengthening your relationship with that country. On the other hand, you're becoming more fragile in terms of supply lines. So it's a mixed bag as such. We can't just make everything here, which will be much more expensive than having it made, whether in China or Asia, Vietnam, wherever, or Mexico. You can't just have it all made here and still be able to sell your products everywhere. So it's a give and take. You have to decide what is vital to our security, what would be existential if we had that supply interrupted, and therefore we have to start making it here and parceling out that ability to contribute to that product or these products very discreetly. So it's
I hope that toilet paper makes the essential list on the, what's essential for our economy to function. Before I do a final thank you, Secretary Cohen, I just want to say one more word about the council, the World Affairs Council here. I love the question about what do we do?
Yeah.
Right? And you had a nice answer to that. And I think it begs the question for us as a council, what do we do? Right? In this moment of uncertainty, in this moment of feeling vulnerable about some changes that are happening. I think the answer we're trying to give as leadership to the council is let's keep talking, right? Let's keep these conversations going, bring in very thoughtful, knowledgeable folks like Secretary Cohen and others, right? So expect that from us. And if you have ideas about how the council can continue these conversations and build some community in this moment, that's what we would love to do. So thank you all for coming tonight. And my biggest thanks first are to Sarah for moderating today. So I want to say a big thank you to Sarah. And then obviously to you, Secretary Cohen, what a pleasure. And
David, let me thank you and thank everyone for sitting through this. I could spend the entire evening with you discussing. But I just want to say we have to kind of marshal our anger or our rage and be selective in terms of how we go about expressing our difference of opinion. If we're just criticizing everything, we'll lose the intensity of focusing on given issues. So we've got a new administration. We can see they've made mistakes out of the box. They're going to make more. But hopefully, I want them in a way to succeed in making us a more prosperous and stable and powerful influence in the world, because the world is very dangerous, it's very turbulent, and we need strong leadership. What we don't need is a dictatorship. What we don't do is we look at the flaws in democracy and say, oh, it's flawed, and it is. But it doesn't mean you justify going to a tyranny, into a dictatorship. So we have to have something that responds to the needs of the people, but does so pursuant to the rule of law. I end my case. Thank you for listening to me tonight.
we do need to sort of make our way out, which is so unfriendly. But thank you all for coming, and a big thanks to Freddie. Have a good night. Thanks, Secretary.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Good night.
Now the question is okay, so think on that one.
Oh, thank you. On Albania.
Okay, good. Are you gonna?
I might text you.
I wonder, like,
If not, we'll see when inshallah. Okay, good.
is this yours?
You can just put it wherever. I don't know where Allison is putting all this stuff. It's great that you're here.
Yeah, we need to figure out when we're gonna.
Yes, absolutely. And send me your number, but I'd love to connect.
Yes. Tell Connie we hope she feels better.
Yes.
That was great. Thanks so much for telling us.
Yeah.
Thanks for saying
How
hello.
are you at Constable Street?
Good.
And then in March, we're having all this stuff.
Oh, good to see you.
Yeah.